But how did George make the journey to England to become our national patron saint? To find out, I've come to a remote and windswept part of the English countryside, a place called Dragon Hill, near Uffington, by the famous White Horse. So why is this spot significant in the story of St. George?
This is one of a number of places that claim to be the sites where St. George fought the dragon. The reason that no plants will grow here is because this is where the dragon's blood was shed. So he's having a fight with the dragon in order to rescue the princess. And this is allegedly one of the very places where this took place.
And where do we get the story of St. George the dragon fighter from?
Ultimately, it probably relates to an idea of St. George as a form of Christ. The Red Cross is a giveaway. So Christ overcomes the devil, St. George overcomes the dragon. Dragon as a form of devil is an idea that turns up in a number of different saints' legends.
How does this man then, who's born in Asia Minor, buried in the Middle East, how does he become English?
The major factor is that he is useful to the English monarchy in the later medieval period. So they effectively adopt him as their patron saint. Somebody such as George, who is a figure of conquering military authority, is a much better candidate to use than a genuinely homegrown saint. And then we have the Reformation taking place with the suppression of the cults of saints who are non-biblical. And St. George is one of the very, very few that manages to survive. And it seems to be because he is politically useful.
So, with St. George on their side, the English monarchy felt spiritually protected, waging war on whoever crossed them. But the real enemy the dragon slayer would encounter on English soil was the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century that set out to attack the power and practices of the Catholic Church. And who better to attack than non-biblical saints? The Reformers believed saints should no longer be middlemen. People should go directly to God for help. Under the orders of Henry VIII, churches across England and Wales were stripped of iconography and celebrations were limited. So how did St. George survive? The martyr's religious role was greatly reduced, but his battling qualities ensured his survival. George, the now English knight, was reborn into the politics of the English ruling monarchy. So was George the right choice?
I think he was a choice that was more right than was appreciated at the time. I don't think that somebody like Edward III sat down and made a considered decision about which saint would best exemplify his people. And certainly at that stage he really would have had no idea at all about the multicultural aspects of St. George, the fact he's recognised in Islam. He is not a white Englishman in the way that he has been tended to be represented in the modern era.
So this is why I'd grown up in England and able to identify with St. George. The patron saint's Christian worth had been repeatedly undermined, and things have got worse for George. Since the 1970s, he seems to have been hijacked by right-wing racists like the National Front as a symbol of extreme patriotism. The neo-Nazi League of St. George even bore his name. When football hooligans fly St. George's cross, they call upon the same protection from the warrior saint as did the warfaring kings and queens from the past. In both cases, poor old St. George is caught in the middle. But in recent years, there's been a real effort to rehabilitate St. George the chivalrous knight. Parades and ceremonies across the country, like this one organised by the Royal Society of St. George, are trying to reclaim St. George and make his day a true national festival. St. George's Day is still very important in the calendar of the Catholic Church in England. At St George's Cathedral in South London, on the eve of the saint's feast day, a special service is held in which a relic, said to be a bone from the saint, is venerated. So what can St George's religious role be in England today? What do you actually teach people about St George?
I think what we teach them is two things that St George says to me. One is that he died as a martyr for the faith, that he slew dragons. Now, I think there are loads of dragons in our society which still need to be challenged by the gospel, and only the gospel can slay those dragons. Look at here in the inner city, look what the effect of drugs and drug abuse has done to many of our young people. It's almost stripped us of a generation. They're the dragons we need to sort out and start doing something about.
Is George then a good patron saint?
I think George is a pretty good patron saint to have. I think the difficulty is that he can often be taken, and some of his iconography can be misused. I mean, you often associate the flag of St George now with some right-wing groups or groups who would seek to dishonour his image. But I think what we have to do is always go back to fundamentally what we know about him and take some of those myths, but translate them for our day.
So, given that we're in a multicultural, multi-ethnic society, do you feel George has a place in bringing people together?
I do.
How?
He's owned by many countries. I mean, do you know that he's owned by Catalonia, Moscow, Turkey, England as their patron saint? So again, this is something that can unify people by saying, this is something we own. We claim this man to be a saint for us. We claim him to teach us something about God.
The message from the Catholic Church seems clear. George's virtues and powers still have a role in multicultural England today. So as my journey to find St George comes to an end, I want to know if the lessons of the Middle East, where George is a unifying figure for both Christians and Muslims, could apply here in England. What will a young English Muslim make of this Christian saint? Askar, when I was growing up, the last thing in the world I would do is wrap myself in the St George's flag. Yeah. How did you experience the flag growing up?
Exactly the same. It was kind of a symbol that said, well, it kind of had racism all over it. Or, you know, if you saw a bunch of lads and they were wrapped in the English flag, you thought trouble. You know, you'd cross the street. You know, I did have a massive disconnect with, you know, St George and the flag, which is sad, but it's true.
One of the things that I've learnt about St George is that it can bring people together in a religious context. In the Middle East, there were Muslims and Christians who saw St George as one and the same. He was Al-Hidra, who's there within the Quran. So do you think that, given that, St George has the potential to unite people across religious communities here?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it was a shock for me to you know, find that out. And you kind of realise, my God, there's so much more in common we could have. Right now, you have this kind of massive disconnect, especially after 7/7. Muslims themselves feel really alienated. We can have a real synergy between us if only we can just promote it as that. I mean, what a great icon. It's so deep-rooted in England, isn't it? And Al-Hidra is so deep-rooted in Islam. If anything, if there was one icon that could unify us, it would be St George.
So St George and Al-Hidra as unifiers in England could work. My quest to find the first of our 4 national patron saints has shown me that George could have a real contemporary role to play in England today.